The United States is a fairly young country, and Americans are one of the youngest nations in the world. Because of this, many people mistakenly think that US history is not interesting and boring, but in fact, it is not. Yes, the history of this country is not as huge as China, but is full of many events that will certainly surprise you, and in this video I will try to prove it. The first humans appeared on the territory of modern America 20 to 25,000 years ago. They crossed here from Chukotka through the frozen Bering Strait in wintertime. About 14,000 years ago, ancient settlers divided into two groups. The first group settled a present-day territory of North America, while the second group went far south and established settlements in South America. America was first discovered by the Icelandic Viking Leif Erikson back in 1000 AD. He even tried to colonize the new land, but the colonies did not take root. And in 1492, Christopher Columbus rediscovered America for Europeans. This fact turned the fate of the continent, Europe, and the whole world upside down. Colonization of the Americas began in 1565 with the Spanish colonies in Florida. Then the English, French, and other Europeans began to arrive on the new continent. The English established their first permanent settlement in 1607 in what is now the state of Virginia. It was Jamestown, a trading post and fortress that stood in the way of the Spanish advancing and seizing land in the interior of the continent. Already by 1620, Jamestown had a population of 1,000. This was facilitated by the active development of tobacco plantations since 1609. Since then, large numbers of Europeans have been drawn to the Americas, attracted by the rich resources of the New World, freedom from strict religious dogma and political conflict. In 1630 to 1643, there was a veritable immigration wave. 20,000 new colonists arrived in the New England region. Another 45,000 arrived in the Central American islands and the southern colonies. War of Independence. In 1754, Benjamin Franklin created a blueprint for a union of the English colonies in America with their own government. He proposed that Britain appoint its own president so that the metropolis would retain its power. But London did not like this initiative. Later in 1773, Americans held a protest in Boston to protest a tea law that the British Parliament had passed shortly before. This law violated the rights of the colonists by increasing duties on British tea. In response, the Americans destroyed a British tea shipment. This event became known as the Boston Tea Party and triggered the Revolutionary War. In 1774, the First Continental Congress of the English colonies assembled in Philadelphia. It was attended by George Washington, among others. The delegates formulated demands for Great Britain, but London reacted negatively and demanded complete submission. Americans realized that it was time to fight for independence using a core strength, unity. And in 1776, the British colonies created the Continental Army and appointed Washington general. And so began the War for Independence. Afterward, Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence, which formed the basis of the Constitution of the future United States of America. The British were unhappy with what was happening in America, and to quell the rebellion, they decided to send troops. At first the Americans had a hard time, losing battles and retreating, but soon there was a turning point when France and Spain began to support the rebels. And after much fighting, in 1782, the British House of Commons voted to end the war. Britain began negotiations with the colonies, which resulted in peace and recognition of the independence of the United States. After the War of Independence, an active period of land expansion began. In 1803, the Americans struck a lucrative deal called the Louisiana Purchase. They acquired from France a huge territory, which now includes the states of Arkansas, Oklahoma, Iowa, Missouri, Nebraska, Kansas, and others. To date, this accounts for about 23% of the current U.S. territory. And 30 years after the American War of Independence, the Second Anglo-American War began, which was called the Second War of Independence. It began in 1812 and lasted until 1815. During this time, several hard-fought battles took place, resulting in peace. The parties stayed to their boundaries, and the Americans secured an end to British support for the Indians. Texas Revolution. Prior to 1845, Texas was a Mexican state. Initially, about 30,000 American farmers moved here because of the availability of cheap land. The occasion for their discontent was a chain of events that included the prohibition of slavery in 1829 and the prohibition of immigration from the United States in 1830. Disgruntled locals declared Texas independence. The Mexican government sent an army to restore the territory's subordination, but in the course of many battles Texas managed to win. And on May 14, 1836, the Treaty of Texas Independence was signed. But it was not that simple. The fact is that the western part of Texas continued to have an unclear legal status, and in 1845, it was possible to solve the problems by incorporating Texas into the United States of America. The U.S.-Mexican War. The war began in 1846 over territorial disputes between Mexico and the United States, following the annexation of Texas to the United States. The U.S. Army defeated the Mexican Army, and eventually, a peace agreement was made in which Mexico gave up more than half of its territory, receiving $15 million in return. But the final border between the United States and Mexico was established in 1853 by the Treaty of Gadsden. The cost of the transaction amounted to $10 million. The main reason for acquiring the land was the project of the Transoceanic Railroad, which was to pass in these places. In addition, there were strained relations with the leadership of Mexico, dissatisfied with the amount of money received from the U.S. under the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the very treaty that ended the Mexican-American War and gave the U.S. a huge part of Mexico. Accession of Alaska. The purchase of Alaska was the second major purchase of territory by the United States government. The first was the purchase of French Louisiana from France in 1803. The transfer of Alaska into full possession of the United States took place on October 18, 1867. But why did Russia sell Alaska? After the Crimean War, in which Russia suffered a defeat of money in the treasury, was not enough. Moreover, there was no money to develop the territory of Alaska. But the most important reason for the sale of Alaska was the vulnerability of the colony. The fact that the Indian tribes did not want to obey the Russians, and British and American traders provided the Indians with weapons and incited to rebellion. Having bought Russian America, the United States, as shown by further events, has made one of the most profitable deals in its history. The territory proved to be rich in natural resources, including oil and gold. It was strategically well-positioned and provided the U.S. with dominant influence in the north of the continent and on the way to the Asian market. By telling just a small piece of U.S. history, I hope to prove to you that it is full of the most incredible and very interesting events. And I decided that it would be simply wrong to fit the entire history of the United States into one video, so I will make a series of videos about this country in order to go deeper into its history and show it much better. But without your support, I just will not understand whether you want a video on this topic or not. If yes, then write in the comments want a sequel, and also put a like and subscribe to the channel. I will be very pleased. And as always, pump your brains. See you around.